The COVID period. The world was in shambles. Countries like Sri Lanka went completely bankrupt. Spain's GDP shrank by 10 to 12%, and every second country was struggling to get their economy back on track. But there is one country which not only neutralized its impact on its economy but also hitting record numbers in economic growth. I'm talking about United States. Let me show you this graph. This is the total wealth graph of USA. Right now, all the sections of USA's society have reached a combined wealth of $151 trillion. Compared to that, Indian people own $16 trillion of wealth. The interesting part is that the people of USA have added around an equal value of wealth, that is $16 trillion, just in last 2 years. So the obvious question is, how are they doing that? Are they working harder than us? Or is there any underlying technique of increasing wealth? And that's exactly what we are going to talk about today. In today's video, we'll analyze multiple data to find out how the people of USA became so wealthy, and can India ever match that? So why don't we follow this mind map to easily navigate through this video? We'll start with the quick basics of a balance sheet. This fundamental will help us to analyze USA's balance sheet and find out the assets that's making USA super wealthy. Next, we'll understand how these assets are growing directly and indirectly. And finally, we'll conclude by knowing how we as a citizen of India can contribute in building wealth for the nation. So let's begin. Let's start by understanding the very basics of balance sheet. Let's say you want to start a packaging business. You invested around $100,000 and took $50,000 loan to buy machinery and other fixed assets and kept $30,000 cash to run the business. So $100,000 is your equity or wealth and $50,000 as your liability. $120,000 as non-current assets and $30,000 as current assets. Now this asset part will always be equal to your wealth and liability part combined. This is a very basic balance sheet. Now it completely depends upon the business owner how efficiently he is investing his and his lender's money in the kind of assets that gives best return. The primary purpose of a business is to increase the wealth of their owners over time. In the case of a country's balance sheet, the owners are the citizens of that country. Now, when we understood the fundamental of assets, liability and wealth, then the question is, what are the assets US citizens are investing in that's making them so rich? To find that, let's look into their balance sheet. This is US's balance sheet for the year ending December 2022. This is the asset section and this one is the liability and the wealth section. As you can see, the total assets of USA stood at $178.4 trillion. This is equal to the wealth of the people plus the liability they took combined. This wealth has become $151 trillion in the latest update. Now, if you see within the asset section, two of the major asset classes are real estates and the market value of the US domestic businesses. These two asset classes contribute to around 78% of US's total assets, making it as the biggest contributors of US's wealth. Now the question is, what's so special about US's real estate and companies that's making them so valuable? Well, there are direct factors and indirect factors. Let's start with the direct factors. In one of our previous videos, we discussed the leather shoe industry of our country, where I explained 10-step process to leather shoe making. Let me put this in today's context. Generally, it takes 10 steps to manufacture one pair of leather shoes. But the interesting part is that if the product is sold in the third step, we can get a value of rupees 20 per square feet. If it's sold after the ninth step, that is the raw leather, it could be sold for rupees 50 square feet. But if it is sold in the 10th step, that is the shoes, it could be sold for 350 to 500 rupees per pair. So from the first step to ninth step, the value of the product reached to rupees 50. And in the last step, it jumped to almost 7 to 10 times. But if you brand, design and market the product as the 11th step, this premium product could even be sold for rupees 5,000 to rupees 50,000, like how Louis Vuitton and other premium brands did. Now the thing is, Indian companies are mostly focused on the first 9 steps and the companies of USA on the last 2 steps. And that's exactly the difference in the valuation of the Indian companies versus the companies of the USA. 10 times ahead than us. And this applies to every industry, even in the technology industry, where we do all the manufacturing and the mining part, and USA focuses on the highest value added product, that is the innovation of the software and the hardware part. In this case, no matter how hard we work, as often we are targeted for, we can never match the developed economies. Now one can think that those last 2 steps require high skills, and we do not have that necessary high skills. But what if I tell that's not the case? Let me show you this graph. This is Global Service Location Index that ranks 78 countries based on 52 matrices suitable for outsourcing. And as you can see in this graph, India has been ranked #1 destination for outsourcing services. And one of the key factors for this position is high skills. So if not the skills, then what is the primary reason that's affecting the growth of Indian companies? Well, to put it simply, our rank in ease of doing business. Right now, USA is ranked at number 6 in the ease of doing business index and India is ranked at 63rd position. But in some of the individual factors like registering property, paying taxes and enforcing contracts, we rank at 154, 115 and 163 respectively in the world. This means our legal, administrative and financial system is behind at least 100 countries. And these are some very critical problems which will take time to be solved. The problem is not the skills, but skillful people leaving the nation. Unless and until we don't create a very lubricant environment to create businesses here itself, we cannot expect the innovators of the nation to stay in the country and create high value added companies. It's much easier to go to USA, start a business, become rich and return back to India compared to do the same thing in India. Let's look into the balance sheet again and focus on the second major contributor to US total assets, that is the real estates, which is even bigger than the domestic companies. Now the same question, why the US real estates are so valuable and will India ever match that? Look, real estate valuation are mostly driven by the commercial and the residential properties of the urban areas. Let me put some data to explain it further. In USA, around 80% of population lives in urban areas compared to only 36% population in India right now. Majority of Indian people, around 64%, are still living in the rural areas, owning their ancestral land and homes. They are hardly participating in the real estate market. Secondly, if I continue the data, in USA, approximately 62% of their population is above 30 years of age compared to only 48% in India. This data is important because only the people above the age of 30 drives the demand of property purchases. Below that, either people tend to live in their parents' home or rent at a very small scale. So if I conclude the data, in USA, around 48% of the population lives in the urban areas who are above 30 years of age, compared to only 17% of the same in India. So only 17% of the population is actually driving the real estates of India, compared to 48% in United States. So now the question, will Indian real estate ever surpass the real estates of United States? Well, why not? China surpassed it recently. Once our population starts to enter the age bracket of 30 to 60 years and began to shift into the urban areas, the Indian real estates will gradually surpass the real estates of USA. The biggest factor is the time here. Okay, now the reasons that I gave for both the asset classes of USA were the direct factors. There's an indirect factor as well which is affecting the valuation of these asset classes, that is US dollars. Let me show you two graphs together. This one is the currency print graph and this one is the wealth of USA. As you can see from 2020, suddenly the wealth of people started to grow rapidly. And at the same time, the currency print of Federal Reserve of USA has a similar spike. So the very obvious question is that how's currency printing is impacting the wealth of the people? Well, to put it in a very simple terminology, whenever the Federal Reserve print notes, they begin to give loans to the commercial banks at a very low interest rates. This is the interest rate graph of Federal Reserve of USA. These are the rates at which the US Federal Reserve gave loans to the commercial banks and institutions. As you can see from the 1980s, the Fed has continuously decreased its rates to the lowest in 2008 when it reached almost 0%. Then again from 2020 to 2022, it remained around 0%. This is exactly the time when the wealth of the people increased in the form of real estates and private equity. Look, if Federal Reserve is giving loan to the banks at 0%, the bank can easily give mortgage loans to the people at 2 to 3% because that's the margin they want from mortgage loans. Similarly, they can give business loans at 4 to 5% margin. Now think about it. What if you get a home loan at 2 to 3% and business loan at 4 to 5%? Even if the person who doesn't have money to start a business or buy a house can easily take loan at a minimum of 2 to 5% interest rate. So a lot of American people began to buy houses and start businesses, inflating their wealth and asset value. Now this was only possible because US dollar is a global reserve currency. If an average American wants to buy 1 million worth of goods from India or China, they can buy it with their dollars because every country accepts dollars. Now that American's wealth increased by 1 million with his dollars. An average Indian cannot do the same thing with INR. Even if the Reserve Bank of India print notes and give it to the public at low interest rate, the money will slowly become useless because only a very few will accept INR outside India. In this sense, India can only match the wealth of USA if INR is accepted in more and more countries. In that case, it's very important for our country to make and maintain good relations with most of the countries so that they accept INR for trading. So if I conclude, as an Indian, it's our duty as well to create something so valuable that it's demanded across the globe and the world will be bound to accept INR for trading. I made a separate video on how USD became a global reserve currency and how India is countering that with gold. Secondly, I've linked on all the resources I've used to make this video. I request you to go through them and let me know in the comment section what's your take on this. Having said that, let me depart for today, and if you found anything valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Till then, tata bye bye, see you again.